Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. Today, we're going to be getting into how to beat Mr. Game and Watch himself. He's been terrorizing the meta lately, so we wanted to do an episode about him, talk about the counterplay, all that jazz. So if you guys do want to support us, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments below if you think Game & Watch is underrated or overrated. And if you guys want to support us even more, go ahead and subscribe to the Discord where you can ask us questions. And before we get into the topic, we do have a question that we have in the Discord. So Ramses, why don't you go over it?
Yeah, so Alto came through. Appreciate the support. And they said, I myself struggle with tilting, beating Yu-Gi-Oh!, Under Night, or Smash. I can get in my own head. Especially when I drop a combo, I'm normally very good at hitting, or flub aligning Yu-Gi-Oh! And get a subpar end board. All the same, I can really get in my own head when it comes to that sort of thing, and it gets me tilted. How would y'all deal with playing while tilted, and what suggestions do you all have to try and get out of tilting as soon as possible as to not affect the current match you would be in? Thanks again, and to everyone watching or listening, the Discord is a great way to support Smash University. Dude, Alto went all out. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Alto.
Hell yeah.
What do you think, Charles? How do you handle tilt? I know you've worked with like really top level players, and emotions can get pretty high. And I think especially Tweak had like an era in which he really suffered from like tilting in mid game. What was you guys' approach to handling tilt?
I think for me, it's the main thing. Meditation helped a lot. I think just for anyone that I've talked about tilting with, I think just being in the present. I know we talked about that in some of the previous episodes, and how meditation can really help, because it's all about being in the present, right? Whenever you're tilted, you're thinking about something that happened in the past and you're harping on it. And even it's even to the point where, for me personally, I would play friendlies and I would like verbally complain about dumb shit in the game. But I make it a goal of mine now that when someone falls out of like a fox up air, or like down air doesn't fully connect, or something, a hurt box shift happens, like you can put energy into being upset about the said thing that happened. Or if you're focused and you're more concerned about what's happening right then and there, then it's a lot easier to just make the play, right? Because if so, say like Fox up air 1 connects, but up air 2 doesn't, you might not have the most frame advantage, but you still want to be ready for the next scenario, right? If you're putting energy into even speaking, then you're probably not ready for the directional air dodge that they panicked, and then Fox could have up smashed or something like that, right? So it's all about being in the present, and specifically with card games too. I think I have a decent amount of experience competing in not like a bunch of different card games, but a decent amount of card games. So with card games, it's like you make a mistake, and instead of just harping on the mistake that you made and what you could have had, you need to look at your resources and be like, how do I win with this board state? Or how do I win with the resources in my hand and stuff like that, right? And even though sometimes it's impossible, sometimes if you just fuck up, you lose no matter what. But it's more of like going through the motions of being like, how can I win with whatever resources I have right now? To me, the backbone of it really comes down to if your priority and your most concern is all put into the present, then it's a lot harder to get tilted. So I think that's the backbone of not being tilted, is just constantly being in that mindset of, hey, like I make mistakes, or everybody makes mistakes, but it's more so the people that are able to get themselves out of those mistakes are people that stay in the present, and they always want to understand and they want to know how they can win in their current situation. And just, to me, it all stems off of that. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get that. I think that a lot of times for me, when I look at just how people are like playing, like it's okay. You need to understand that something's going to happen, right? Whether it's like a personal mistake here, like, you thought this was going to hit this way, whatever it may be. And it's like those things are going to occur. But how much I always try to explain like how much of that moment is going to take away more moments, right? Like, are you going to allow that time to be extended more than it has to be, right? It's a mistake. Why would you want to extend that? And that's what you do when you're thinking, right? When you're just consistently thinking about it. And so I always try to like preach to understand, like, hey, by allocating more time to a moment that was already bad, you're losing out on more moments where you could actually make that change, right? And so the optimal thing is, yeah, we can talk about that later. We can get upset about that later. But right now, you have agreed to play this game. All the things that you see in the game, you have agreed to, right? So it's not time to sit around and be upset. You know, when you're done and reflecting, yeah, you can reflect and be like, man, that's stupid as shit that's in the game. Sure, whatever. But like, I always say, like, hey, when you agree to the game, you agree to the game, right? So now take all that time and push it towards that. Take what you can, and move on from that moment, because you should not extend out a moment that was unfavorable to you. That's just stupid. So I try to look at it from that aspect when I'm like explaining to students.
Yeah. I think you guys covered a lot of like the mental facilities. I think kind of going back last week, we talked about IPS, ideal performance state, right? Or the week before, depending on when you watch this. So we talked about ideal performance state, and we kind of divided it into like physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, right? And so I think Charles and Bam kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of your mental capacity. I think in terms of your focus, you should always be focusing on the present. I think what you should be looking into, though, if you're getting tilted, is the underlying emotional issues, because oftentimes there's some sort of emotion tied to your attachment to whatever happened that tilted you. And so what you often find is that, like, for example, oh, I didn't hit a combo that I normally hit. Okay, I feel entitled to hitting it. Or maybe there's like a mini like trauma. I know it's like an extreme word, but you've lost a lot of tournament sets before because you dropped like important combos. And so when you're in that situation, you get like that feeling of dread where you're like, oh, I should not drop this combo. And that pressure causes you to drop it in the first place, right? And so when you find yourself getting tilted, something that I really recommend is investigating the emotional cause. So what emotions are related to the tilt? And so tilt by itself, it's just frustration, right? I think tilt and frustration are essentially the same term. We just gamify it. But frustration is often a masking of sadness. In the same way that anger is, right? So when you're angry, you're really just like sad and you want to change something. That's essentially what anger is. And so when you're frustrated, it's a form of anger. And so when we're angry, we're sad. And so if we're sad, we got to figure out, okay, what makes us sad about like dropping a combo? Like, and of course, like these are extreme terms. Like I'm not saying like you're crying your eyes out because you're dropping a combo. But at the end of the day, there's some sort of like disappointment in yourself. Maybe it's like confirming an insecurity, or you feel like it is, or like I said, maybe you feel entitled, etc., etc. There's some sort of like pattern that your brain is recognizing. There's a lot of different causes for tilt, for frustration, and so what I generally recommend again is to reflect on these moments and ask yourself essentially like, what is the emotional experience related to the frustration, and try to fix that. And so there are two elements to fixing tilt. One is prevention. And so fixing the emotional element of it is prevention. And two is solving when you're in the game. And so that is more of what Bam and what Charles talked about. When you find yourself in the moment and you find yourself tilting, how do you pull yourself back in? Is by focusing on the present. And so huge shout outs to them. I think they really tackled the problem well. Tony, what would you like to add to the subject of tilt?
Well, I think everyone else has covered every single detail I could add to what tilt is. For solutions, a couple of things that have worked for me personally in the past is the first is to externalize the problem and ask yourself, what is the game actually? So what is it that I think the game is supposed to be, and why is that not lining up with what the game is? So similar to what everyone has said prior, but the idea here is to kind of have a model of the game in your mind that exists outside of yourself. Like, what would you view the game as a spectator? And then is it possible for you to spectate that game even though you're in the game? And so the idea is this is actually a separate skill that you have to practice, that externalizing without taking things personally and without saying, oh, well, player A or B should win. If you don't care who is going to win, because the better player does not always win, then you suddenly lose part of that attachment to it because you aren't thinking to yourself, oh, well, I need to win or I should win or things like that. It's just a matter of player A or player B is going to win. Whoever wins, it doesn't matter. All that matters is what causes those wins and how we can go ahead and link ourselves to that for cause and effect, which I believe we've discussed in the mentality and technical aspect of the game video. Something else that I recommend for being productive with the situation, being productive with tilt, is to treat it as a training opportunity.
Yeah.
So pulling yourself out of tilt is a skill, but playing while tilted is a separate skill. So reducing your likelihood of being tilted is a third skill. So the idea is if you are proactively focusing yourself on what is in your control and what isn't, and what these things mean to you for whether you're playing well or not, then that reduces your likelihood to be tilted. And then recognizing the opportunity to train through tilt is, of course, the third, with everyone else having covered the second possibility very well. Once you are tilted, just focus on what do I want and how am I going to get it. Anything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you even get it or not. It matters whether or not you made your highest attempt to get it. Because, as I said before, the better player does not always win. Ultimately, all games are games of chance. You are never going to have, or rather, I should say, most competitive games are not games in which the better player wins 100% of the time. It's simply a matter of chances and odds. And then you, as a player, are a multiplicative function to that equation. And so how good you are is just you being a higher multiplier, but you're never going to be a 100%, or rather, even if you are, that is going to still not give you a 100% win rate. And so the idea here is that you simply need to do your best and recognize what it means to do your best in advance and then focus on those things. And that, I think, is the real opportunity of playing with tilt.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last tidbit I want to do is just for something that helped me a lot. And this is something that Void told me. I think I said this multiple times on the podcast, but knowing your tilt habits is something that can try to bring you back into the present. So, for example, when I get nervous or tilted, I'll just jump a lot because Fox wants to be in the air and he has a very vertical gameplay. So if I ever feel tilted or nervous, I know that I do specific things and I lose because of doing these specific things. And if I lose because I'm doing the same thing over and over again, then I'm not really learning anything. So even just realizing that you're tilted is something that can yank you back in this brain. You're like, oh, I'm frustrated right now. Now, so when I'm frustrated, I do X and Y. So as long as I do not X and Y, I'll lose the game. At the worst case scenario is you lose the game, but you didn't do X and Y. So at least you get some learning experience out of it, right? So that's another thing that Void told me that helped me a lot and it kind of felt like definitely sticked. So
one final thing I'd like to say, because I think this is interesting too. I think tilt is also pretty closely related to like flow state. And so if you think about flow state, it's actually not just like a binary thing. If you're at home, you want to know more, you can Google something like flow state chart, and it will show you like a chart of the various emotions related to flow state. And they are contingent on your perceived skill level and your perceived challenge level. And so what happens when you mess something up, your perceived skill level goes down while the challenge level stays the same. And oftentimes that brings you into a state of anxiety, essentially like anxious feelings. And that is a lot of the tilt. And so something that you can also do to kind of like combat the tilt in the moment is to increase your perceived skill level. And that's where we kind of go back to what Tony said, where you want to focus on what you can control. And so if you're in a frustrated mind state and you are essentially a little bit anxious or you're feeling anxious type of feelings, doing simple mix-ups, right? Like simplifying your game plan and doing things that you can succeed at, even in a negative mind state, can help you increase your own perceived skill level because now you're succeeding at interactions. And even if you're not, you're properly interpreting them because they're so simple, right? And so that's going to increase your perceived skill level. And that in turn is going to counter some of the anxiousness. And then through that, you can kind of like resume your usual game plan. And so, what I recommend, this is something that I do with a lot of top level players that I talk with, is that they have a simple game plan. And this is something that can be as simple as like, I'm playing Joker and like I'll dash back if I think they attack, and I'll dash forward if I think they'll be passive. Like as something as simple as that, and just playing that for like literally like 3, 4, 5 interactions, just being successful there is going to get your brain back into that feeling of, okay, I am skilled, I know what's going on, and that's going to pull you out of that feeling of tilts. So that's something to read into if you want to know more about it. Flow state, there's a lot of theory about it, so recommend reading up on that if you're dealing with tilt.
I also, speaking of card games, I believe Brian DeMars wrote a fine Magic the Gathering article on tilt and how he personally dealt with it. So I recommend that for anyone who would like further reading as well.
Nice. Sounds like great resources. Damn, I am a huge fan of Magic the Gathering, so that might even be something that I read. But
Same.
let's get into the topic at hand, Mr. Game & Watch. I mean, so